Hello, and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast Pitchfest 2020 series. I'm Nick Chiarelli. Thanks for joining me. Late last year, OIO ran the Ocean Impact Pitchfest 2020. We were inundated with almost 200 applications from 38 countries and were blown away by the incredible breadth and quality of ideas and ventures that applied, all trying to make a positive impact on planet Ocean. Over the course of this Pitchfest 2020 series of the Ocean Impact Podcast, we'll dive into the challenge and opportunity areas that each of the finalists are working on, find out about their unique solution, and discuss the key challenges and learnings they've encountered on their journey so far. We'll also discuss their why, their motivation for working towards a healthy ocean, what the road ahead looks like for them, and how you, the listener, might be able to support their journey. This week, I'm talking to Tom Dennis, who's the co-founder and chairman of Australian company Swell Energy, who placed second in the Ocean Impact Pitchfest 2020. Swell have developed the Uniwave 200 that utilises a unidirectional oscillating water column to effectively mimic a blowhole and generate electricity. The oscillating water column consists of a chamber that's open underneath the waterline, and as waves pass the oscillating water column, the water rises and falls inside, forcing air to pass by a turbine at the top of the chamber and generating electricity. Swell were recently awarded a $4 million grant from the Australian Renewable Energy Agency to develop a demonstration project using the Uniwave 200 on King Island in Bass Strait and in collaboration with Hydro Tasmania. At the time of recording this conversation, the Uniwave 200 unit was in the process of being transported to King Island, and I'm happy to report that it was successfully deployed in January 2021. The technology has several applications and benefits in addition to conventional energy generation, including displacing diesel in remote island locations, producing hydrogen, producing desalinated water, and potentially acting as a form of protection against coastal erosion. I hope you enjoy this discussion with Tom Dennis on the Ocean Impact Podcast Pitchfest 2020 series.
Can't take the ocean out of me.
Hi Tom, and thanks for joining us this morning on the Ocean Impact Podcast Pitchfest 2020 Meet the Finalists series.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So we'll get straight into it. Firstly, can you tell the listeners a little bit about your why? And so what I mean by that is, what's your connection to the ocean, your personal connection, and what was your motivation to pursue this opportunity that Swell Energy is pursuing?
Well, I've always lived within about 1 kilometre of the ocean, so it's sort of just, I guess, part of me, something that you take for granted to some extent. But more specifically, I have my PhD in mathematics was concentrated around the physics of the ocean and the mathematics of energy levels in waves and tides and currents and all sorts of salinity gradients and all that sort of thing. So it became natural for me to want to pursue something beyond just learning about the ocean and actually applying my knowledge in a way that could be beneficial to all. And that led me to thinking of ways of extracting energy from waves. There are other forms of energy in the ocean too, but I decided to concentrate on waves. And having grown up not too far from the Kiama Blowhole down the south coast, about 120 kilometres south of Sydney, a lot of people sort of make that connection that between my background or my having grown up, with intimate knowledge of that blowhole and the fact that our technology is basically an artificial blowhole. So, I guess subliminally maybe something clicked there, but I can't put a finger on exactly when that was, if that was in fact the motivation for the idea for this technology.
And where were you working? What were you doing career-wise at the time when the ideas started to enter into your head?
Well, I have to admit that, I started thinking about it when I was still doing my PhD. So, after that, it just became something that grew and the ideas started to coalesce into something more concrete and tangible. And then I was sort of involved at various levels of, I did have other jobs, but I remember in the early days, I'd come home from work and then start thinking and doing some calculations and stuff like that. But it wasn't until 2016 that the real light bulb moment that triggered the formation of Wave Swell occurred. And that was when it became obvious that there was a way of doing this that actually was a lot better and potentially cheaper and more survivable and in the harsh ocean environment. So, Wave Swell kicked off then, and we've been really, kicking goals ever since.
And I suppose the period from, the very early stages of the idea right through to when Wave Swell commenced, you would have been driven even more to go after that problem, right? Seeing, how vital it is that we do move to a renewable energy future.
Yeah, exactly. Even back then in the very early days, I realized that, renewable energy was going to be something for the future, but it was probably a bit early at that stage, really. But now it's pretty clear that the world is moving to renewables, that renewables can be the most cost-effective form of energy. And, wind and solar have been developed over a number of decades now, and, they've managed to drive their costs down below that of fossil fuels. So wave energy is sort of the last frontier for ocean energy, at least. You can throw tidal in there too, but tidal energy, the global resource for tidal energy is only about 1/10 that of wave energy. So, they are the sort of the last frontier of the true renewables. And not only that, but wave energy, for example, is a lot more predictable and reliable and consistent than wind and solar. You've probably heard people who maybe are arguing against those renewables that their main point is that they're intermittent. Now, intermittency isn't a major issue unless it's a very quick intermittence, and that can happen with solar, for example. You can have a plant pumping out heaps of energy, and then suddenly a cloud comes over, and within seconds, the output drops significantly, and that creates a problem for fossil fuel-based plants like coal, for example, to try to pick up that shortfall, within a few seconds. They can't do it. You don't have those problems with wave energy. If you've got decent waves, you don't suddenly have them disappear within a few seconds. You do have, of course, the lulls between your highs and lows, but that's easily accounted for with power electronics these days, and we've got that built into our technology. So even though it's sort of a sinusoidal oscillatory input from the waves, it comes out as a nice even output. So it's a great potential renewable source and one from the ocean, as we all know. So the ocean can provide us with many things, and energy is one of them.
Yeah, that's a good segue there, Tom. So tell the listeners, get a little bit more specific about the opportunity for Wave Swell, the technology itself. And what's the specific opportunity, if you like, that the Wave Swell technology is addressing? How big's the opportunity, and what do any existing solutions look like?
Well, the technology can produce grid scale electricity, but that's not what we're targeting early on. Grid scale electricity is the cheapest electricity there is, and it's difficult when you've only got a small global installed capacity of your technology to be right down there at that low level of cost. But the more addressable market immediately is that of remote communities. And there's plenty of islands around the world that, in a lot of them in the Pacific, but they're also in the Indian Ocean and elsewhere, that currently virtually all of them rely on diesel oil for their generation of electricity. And that's one of the most expensive ways you can produce your electricity. And our technology, as long as it's a decent wave climate, and most of those islands do have decent wave climates, we can produce electricity for cheaper than what they're currently doing. So there's already an immediate market for the technology. The potential worldwide is definitely huge. I mean, there's a $4 trillion a year, US dollar a year electricity market as it stands now, and there's the island community, remote community market probably stands at tens of billions of dollars per year just in sales of electricity. So that's what we're looking to address early on, but longer term, as the more and more of the technology is installed worldwide, we will see the cost coming down, and we will then be competitive with more traditional, larger, mainland grid electricity. And ultimately, we can point to some pretty solid statistics that indicate that in a few decades, we will probably be the technology could well be the cheapest form of electricity in the world. I should also add that we have a very important additional component to the technology. It's not just an electricity generator. It's also, it can double as a form of coastal protection against erosion. So where coastlines are being eroded because there's just simply too much energy in the waves, we can take the sting out of that and convert some of that energy to electricity, and therefore what then impacts the coastline is reduced to whatever level is required. Alternatively, an extension of that is to put the units side by side so there is no gap. You then form a seawall or breakwater. It can be a breakwater for a harbour or a seawall around a small island that then protects that island not only against erosion, but also against sea level rise. And we believe that that's a natural solution to, say, a nation like the Maldives, where inundation from sea level rise is a very, very real concern, and they're already making plans for seawalls around many, if not eventually all, of their islands. So, if you're going to do that, why not implement our technology, solve the problem of the seawall, and at the same time reduce your electricity costs and make it renewable energy instead of seeing diesel fumes pumped out into the atmosphere from your generation.
Sure. And Tom, for the sake of the listeners that haven't seen the Swell Energy unit, can you give us a little bit of a description, some insight into what it looks like, how it works? You talked about the blowhole before.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's like an artificial blowhole. It's a chamber. I mean, a natural blowhole, through natural processes, there's a cave in the coastline, and over many years, I guess that cave gets bigger, and then there's a hole forms in the top so air can get out. So as the water goes into that cave, it ends up being shot out the top through that hole. It's not only air in that case, but also water, like the spout or blowhole of a whale. We form create an artificial version of that. So it's a big hollow cave, and it has a big opening or mouth underneath the water. And as the wave comes by, it causes the water inside that cave to rise and fall. And of course, up above, and the part of the unit is below the water, but a bit of it, a smaller amount, is above the water. And at the top of that is a small opening that we have a turbine sitting in. So as the water rises and falls, it compresses and decompresses the air. And then what we do is actually extract the energy on only the downstroke. Now that might not sound logical to some people, but it turns out that for a sort of complicated physical or physics reasons, that we can actually get more energy by doing it just on the downstroke, or extracting just on the downstroke, than on the up and the downstroke combined. I know it doesn't sound logical, but I won't go into the high-tech reasoning for that at this stage, but that doing it that way is what results in what is called a unidirectional oscillating water column. The oscillating water column is the blowhole, and the unidirectional aspect is the fact that we're only extracting energy on one stroke. The turbine only has to see air coming from one direction, not two, which greatly simplifies the turbine. It makes it more efficient, converts more energy, it's more robust, it's cheaper, and yeah, we end up getting a win-win. We get more energy in, and we also get more energy out. So that's in essence the technology. I know a few diagrams wouldn't go astray, but we can't really do that over a verbal podcast.
Well, I mean, I think from my point of view, the way I see the unit is that it looks like a mid-size passenger ferry.
Yeah, it does. In fact, the latest, I mean, our unit for King Island, and I guess we might talk about that shortly, but our King Island unit, which is just about complete, the latest photographs of it, it actually, I made the comment, I think it looks a bit like a super yacht, one of the modern day super yachts, and it actually acts quite a lot like a catamaran, because it has two floating pontoons on either side, or two buoyant pontoons, which enable it to float, so it can be towed to and transported to its location, where those buoyant pontoons are then flooded and it sinks to the seabed into its natural position.
Interesting, yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got some, I mean, if you know what the fast ferries look like on Sydney Harbour, that's exactly what I think about when I see the Wave Swell unit. So, Tom, let's spend a few minutes talking about the journey so far. I mean, you mentioned coming up with the idea, and Wave Swell was commenced officially, I think, in 2016. Let's spend a little time talking through some of the key challenges during that time, and maybe some of those challenges are key for the wave industry as a whole, and some of them are specific to Wave Swell. Let's talk through some of those, and also some of the key achievements to date, also to give the listeners a little bit of a flavour for where you're at.
Well, as I think anyone, certainly in the wave energy space, but more generally in the sort of startup space, will attest. Probably the hardest thing initially is not the technology; it's the funding the company. All early stage companies have this difficulty, and we've done well. We've done really well to be still. We're out there. We've funded our King Island demonstration plant, and we've done pretty well. But that doesn't mean that it was an easy journey. So it's always a bit of a chore. And as I said, we're not alone in that respect. I think we have just about any early stage company saying the same thing. But that said, we've been very successful on the technology front, and it really is looking very, very promising. And we're just with the King Island plant, which I'll just elaborate a little bit on. It's our demonstration plant. It's been constructed in Launceston and Bell Bay in Tasmania, and will soon be transported to King Island, where it will be positioned just off the harbour of the town of Grassy on the island, and that will be producing electricity which will be provided into the Hydro Tasmania King Island grid, which will be when it is producing power there, will be likely the first small island grid in the world to concurrently generate electricity from wind, waves and solar. So 3 different renewable sources. So that's the immediate focus of the company at this stage, and after that we'll be embarking on a technology enhancement program called Project Bluefire. So that's sort of where we are at this stage. We're very confident that we're going to see some great results over the next year or 2, not just from the King Island plant, but from the output of our Project Bluefire, which will result in a much enhanced technology again, on top of what it is already, and something that creates a truly commercial product for implementation wherever anyone wants to see wave energy installed.
And why King Island, Tom? What was the factor or combination of factors that led to that being the first pilot site?
Well, primarily it was because Hydro Tasmania, who are responsible for the grid there, are a world leader in the integration of renewables into small island grids. So we figured that, if you're going to, not everything's up to you, of course, when you're providing electricity to someone, there's that other side of the interconnection, and we felt that they were the best option for taking the electricity and being able to integrate it in a way that didn't create any problems on our side or us creating problems on their side. So it was just a logical location to go to. On top of that, King Island is one of the best wave resources, or has one of the best wave resources in the world. It's exceptional in terms of the wave energy.
Yeah, one of the things that rings in my ears quite often when we talk about wave energy and the challenge and the way forward for the industry was we had Stephanie Thornton from the Australian Ocean Energy Group on the podcast with Tim a while back, and I think Tim put a question to her about where the industry had been and where it was going, and she was very clear that the path forward for wave energy providers was about starting with the use case and the customer first rather than the technology. A lot of, and we saw that actually with Pitchfest. We must have had surprisingly 12 or 13 entrants with wave energy in mind, and the bulk of them were starting with a novel piece of technology. And, we know that there's a long way to go to get that piece of tech to, right, who's going to pay for it and where. So she started, that same conversation went down the road of, okay, well, what are the applications for local wave energy? And, you might spend some time talking about those now, Tom. You mentioned small island developing nations, aquaculture comes up all the time, desalination plants, remote communities.
Yeah. Well, it's probably worth mentioning that there are sort of 2 different areas of the market for wave energy. One is, and they're very much sort of defined by their proximity to the coastline. Our technology, we've decided to concentrate on near shore. So we're quite close to the coast. That has several benefits actually. It means that it's not too far to access, not very far to run the cable back to shore, but it also means that the maximum wave size that you might see hitting the unit is limited. Waves have what are called depth limited. They can only be sustained until they get to about 80% of the depth, when their height is 80% of the depth of the water. So, for example, an 8-meter wave will break in about 10 meters of water. So, you're limiting the maximum force on your structure. By being close to shore too, besides all those benefits, it does enable us to be a form of coastal protection. I mean, you need more than just the proximity to the coast. I mean, in our case, our structure is a big concrete block that, effectively acts as a barrier. Not all wave energy technologies are like that. Then there's the offshore space, which services things like your fish farms, your aquaculture, your remote repowering of, say, submarines and remote underwater vessels that might be well and truly offshore. So you might be hundreds, if even 1,000 kilometres out in the ocean, and you have a wave energy unit that's obviously it's got to be floating, and it might provide power for those sorts of sources. So really quite different, two very different types of market to be addressed. And in our case, we're looking at that nearer shore market that can therefore not only provide electricity, but it can protect against coastal erosion or be a breakwater, a new form of breakwater for a new harbour, but also desalination. You wouldn't produce water or desalinate water well offshore, because you still then have to bring it back to shore. So desalination works well in our favour because we're near to shore. Also, hydrogen production. Hydrogen is essentially a great way to store energy. Well, it's a good way to store energy that that energy can either come from brown sources, traditional fossil fuel, which is what most people are not looking at. They're looking at green hydrogen. If you're going to store energy as hydrogen, you may as well make it from renewable sources, because then you don't have that transport problem. So that's another option for our technology as well.
Great, yes. So Tom, tell us a little bit about the road ahead for Wave Swell. What does the next 12 to 24 months look like? What are the priorities? But perhaps what does success at King Island look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, King Island itself, as I've mentioned, is pretty imminent, and sometime in the first quarter of next year, which is only a few months away, we expect to be receiving data from the production of electricity going into the King Island grid with Hydro Tasmania. So a successful outcome for that plant will be to show that, there's a few different stages to the conversion process. Firstly, we convert the energy in the waves into pneumatic power. That means as air, compressed air of some form or other. It doesn't have to be compressed, it can be decompressed as well. I mean, there's a difference in pressure between the atmosphere and what's inside the chamber. That's a form of energy in that variation of pressure. That then has to be converted via the turbine into mechanical or shaft power, and then that shaft power has to be converted into electricity through the generator. So there's three different fundamental stages of the conversion efficiency process, and we will be looking to demonstrate that each of those lives up to the predictions that the technology has made through the various testing, including probably, or certainly one of the most important is the hydrodynamic phase that we tested at the Australian Maritime College in Launceston. That's the first stage of the process, and it's very fundamental to getting the energy in the waves into the system. And King Island's aim to demonstrate all of these things and to show that they do live up to the potential that we expect. And of course, we're going to get a lot of data from the unit that will be the inputs into Project Bluefire. That's our follow-on, and that data will be used to enhance the technology and make all of those processes, all of those stages of the conversion process even more efficient again. So we will optimize those stages and get an even better technology at the end of Project Bluefire. So that's really what the next 12 to 24 months looks like. Of course, we will be looking to build a project pipeline, most likely for remote island locations, and trying also to, I guess, incorporate our coastal protection aspect into some of those, into that project pipeline.
Great. And Tom, for the budding ocean impact entrepreneurs out there that might be at the start of their journey, do you have any tips from your years of experience with wave swell? Any key learnings, one or two key learnings that you might share for them? Well,
I think that most are going to say, if there was someone who came to me now and said, what do you suggest? I've got this idea. How do you suggest I go about getting it, built into a technology and a company? The first thing they're going to struggle with is the funding part of it. Everyone likes a great idea, but unless you can show that it's really got some legs, no one's going to tip money into it, and therefore you really aren't going to go very far. So the first thing you've got to do is not, you don't have to prove your technology to the nth degree, but you do have to show that it has a solid basis and it has advantages over other things. So I would say, you do have to find at least a little bit of money to go and test at a university. You have to have authority behind it. You can't just say, I tested this in my backyard and this is how good it is, because, unfortunately, there's no shortage of people out there who'll talk up their technology and over talk it, exaggerate it, the benefits. So you do need to have some sort of independent validation that you can gain from having it tested at a respected academic institution, like something like the Australian Maritime College, the largest tank test facility in the Southern Hemisphere. So that whether it's there or the University of New South Wales Water Research Laboratory, and there are others as well, they all will test using world-class facilities and world-class accepted testing procedures and protocols, and will then issue a report that you can then take to show funders, and the funder will then say, oh, well, this looks good, and this is not just you saying it, it's someone independent saying it. So I think that's the way you have to go. Unless you're a multi-millionaire in the first instance and you can do all the funding yourself, well, then that's a different situation. But at some stage you still have to go through that process.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you are that multi-millionaire, you're still, it's applicable just across almost anything, really. Get yourself some good advice, ask a lot of questions. It all sorts of helps. You can chew through that. You can chew through those millions fairly quickly if you don't get the right people around you.
Exactly. Yeah, you can waste a lot, and you don't want to live in a fantasy land. You want to have really positive, critical advice. Someone not just criticizing for no reason, but someone who is trying to be critical for the right reasons, telling you where you may have shortfalls and shortcomings. So I think that you've got to do that sort of, or go down that path.
And the sooner you hear that sort of stuff, the better.
Yeah, the sooner you can start making the corrections that are needed, or doing whatever is required. developing a technology is a fairly long process, and it doesn't all happen on day one. But it helps if you've got patience and you're willing to take a bit of time to do it.
Sure. Tom, we're getting pretty close to the end of our conversation, but we might just finish with, is there any ways that people can support you in your journey? Are you looking for investors? Where can people go to find out more? Take a moment to unashamedly plug Wave Swell and anything you might need going forward.
Okay, well, as I said, funding is always an issue, and we're definitely happy to speak with anyone who may have a desire to invest in the company. If you would, over the podcast, I guess the easiest way to provide information is to visit our website, and there's an email address there that you can, I think it's info@waveswell.com, that you can get in contact with the company to talk about what you might like to do in terms of an investment, or if it's something else that you want to discuss. I mean, you might have a potential project that we'd be interested in. Anyway, that's the way to get in touch with us, is through info@waveswell.com. It's other than that, please stay connected. And I mean, the website's one way of doing so, of course, but I'm sure you'll hear about the King Island project through the normal media channels, in the coming months. So, it's going to be a good, interesting journey, and one we're really looking forward to. So it's all exciting times.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the King Island project come to life, Tom, and looking forward to hearing all about your success there. Thanks very much for joining us today on the Ocean Impact Podcast. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks, Nick. It was a great experience, and I hope the listeners get something out of it.
I'm sure I will. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.